Welcome to this presentation on 2-pound propane systems. We hope you find this time well spent and very informative. My name is Chad Ackner. I'm the Technical Service Advisor for Dealers LP Equipment and the R.E. Michael Company. R.E. Michael has corporate headquarters located in Glen Burnie, Maryland, and Dealers LP Equipment has locations in Davenport, Iowa, Louisville, Kentucky, Hickory, North Carolina, Jackson, Mississippi, Dothan, Alabama, and also Memphis, Tennessee. Please understand that anything we discuss today should in no way be misconstrued to override any of your local applicable codes, any insurance requirements, or any of your company policies. What we discuss today with regard to any code-related issues are referenced from NFPA 54 and NFPA 58. All propane installations must comply with NFPA 54 and NFPA 58. Additionally, all installations must comply with the local authority having jurisdiction, which may be a local code enforcement agency or a fire marshal. Company policies must be followed at all times. Equally important is following the manufacturer's instructions. Often referenced in NFPA 54 and NFPA 58 is the requirement to follow the manufacturer's instructions when installing propane equipment. That's actually part of the code. Work must always be done safely, and equally as important, everything performed, all installation work, leak tests, pressure tests, etc., must be documented and retained. The breakdown of NFPA 54 and NFPA 58 is as follows. Essentially, NFPA 58 will cover everything from the container all the way up to the outlet of the delivery regulator, which could be an integral twin-stage regulator or a second-stage regulator. NFPA 54 covers everything from the outlet of that very same regulator inside the building. Two-pound propane systems are becoming more and more popular, whether it's building a new home to be fueled by propane, converting an existing home from electric or heating oil, or even adding appliances to an existing system, which has a piping system that was designed originally for much fewer appliances. Those are generally the reasons that anyone would consider to do a 2-pound installation. So what exactly is a 2-pound system? 2-pound systems will allow you to maintain a slightly increased or elevated delivery pressure to all of the gas appliances inside of a building, whether it's residential or commercial. Remember that normal operating pressure for natural gas is approximately 7 inches water column, and normal operating pressure for propane is approximately 11 inches water column. What we're talking about here is increasing that delivery pressure to those appliances to allow for a much more efficient use of the interior piping. So when would you use a 2-pound system? Well, on new installations, it would make sense because it allows you to use less expensive, easier to install materials. For example, copper tubing versus corrugated stainless steel tubing or black iron pipe, both of which are considerably more expensive to install. I think 2-pound systems really shine when they're used in existing installations, almost as a retrofit. A lot of times, propane installations are done, and then as the years go by, appliances are added, whether it's a fireplace, a pool heater, a space heater, maybe a gas stove, or a tankless water heater. And as those appliances are added, the piping system that was installed years ago when the installation was new is now all of a sudden inadequate. It's too small. So the real beauty of a 2-pound system is that you can retrofit an existing piping system boost up the pressure just slightly to 2 psi inside the building, and create a much more efficient piping system. Here's a great example. In this case, we have a homeowner that has a 40,000 BTU, 40-gallon direct-fired propane water heater which needs replacement. This customer wants to convert to a 200,000 BTU tankless water heater. Well, how is the piping system, the gas piping system that was installed when the tank-style water heater was brand new, going to supply a nearly 200,000 BTU tankless water heater? Well, in order to figure that out, we first must talk about the installation. When it was originally done, the 420 was set and connected to 40 feet of half-inch OD copper tubing, having a maximum BTU capacity of 44,000 BTUs at 11 inches water column. That's plenty to support that 40-gallon tank-style water heater at 38 or 40,000 BTUs. Our first option would be to remove the existing half-inch copper tubing and replace it with 3/4-inch black iron pipe or 1-inch CSST, both of which are very expensive and labor-intensive to install. Option 2 would be to replace the existing integral twin-stage regulator with a 2-pound integral twin-stage regulator, and then install a line regulator prior to the inlet of the tankless water heater. A line regulator will take the 2 psi inlet pressure and transfer or convert it to 11 inches water column, which is what a propane water heater will operate at. We're going to get more into line regulators later. But the bottom line here is a simple 11-inch water column to 2 psi conversion will give that piping system an estimated capacity of 44,000 BTUs at 11 inches water column and just over 400,000 BTUs at 2 psi, which is an increase of just about 9 times. The question often comes up, why can't we just run 10 psi from a first stage regulator into a building? Well, there are certain code restrictions with regard to that, which we're going to get into right now. NFPA 54 clearly points out that the maximum operating pressure inside of a building is 5 psi. Now, there are certain exceptions to that, but most every propane installation will require a maximum operating pressure of 5 psi inside of a building. Setting the maximum allowable pressure for the inside of a building at 5 psi is done for a few different reasons. The limit of 5 psi is sufficient pressure to allow for stable operation with multiple appliances turning on and off simultaneously. Basically what they're saying is a 5 psi limit or max will more than handle any appliance requirements in a residential application or a light commercial application. In addition to that, it also minimizes the potential for a high volume vapor leak inside of a building. For example, if a piece of piping is compromised, if a hole develops in a piece of piping, or if a flare fitting comes loose, or for whatever reason a leak develops inside of a building, setting that cap at 5 psi minimizes the amount of vapor that will be released into the building. So what are some of the components of a 2-pound system? 2-pound regulators can be bought in either the second stage style or the twin stage style. Traditionally, in a 2-stage system, a first stage regulator will go at the tank, placed out possibly further away from the building. That first stage regulator will drop container pressure down to 10 psi. That 10 psi will come up into the inlet of the second stage regulator. In this case, the second stage regulator will take that 10-pound inlet and turn it into a 2-pound outlet, supplying the building with 2 psi. In the case of a 2-pound twin stage regulator, that regulator will do basically the same thing. However, a twin stage regulator generally is for applications where the container is closer to the building. In the case of a twin stage regulator, it will take container pressure and it will regulate it down to 2 PSI in this case. So you basically have two very similar situations. One installation requires two regulators. Another installation, the twin stage, basically has two regulators built into one component. Container pressure is fed into the inlet of the twin stage 2-pound regulator, and 2-pound outlet pressure is what it will deliver. In addition to either a 2-pound two-stage system or a 2-pound twin stage installation, it's always important to make sure we remember that a line regulator is required before the inlet to any of the appliances. A two-stage 2-pound system is really not that much different from a traditional two-stage installation. The same first stage regulator used in a conventional two-stage system is used in a two-stage 2 PSI installation. The main difference in a 2-pound two-stage installation is the second stage regulator. Instead of having a delivery pressure of 11 inches water column, in this case, the 2-pound second stage regulator will have a delivery pressure of 2 PSI. Again, one of the most obvious changes as well would be the color. All Rego 2 PSI regulators are blue in color. With regard to 2-pound integral twin stage regulators, the regulator itself is very similar in appearance to a traditional twin stage regulator. A traditional twin stage regulator will take container pressure in and convert that or regulate that down to 11 inches water column. In the case of a 2-pound integral twin stage regulator, that also will take container pressure in and regulate it down to 2 PSI. If you look at the picture of this integral twin stage regulator, you'll notice that this regulator is really two regulators in one. It's got a first stage side, a small square first stage regulator or first stage portion, and it also has a second stage side. When both of those regulators are manufactured into one body, that is called a twin stage regulator. And again, in this case, it's got the blue color, so therefore it has an outlet pressure of 2 PSI. I mentioned earlier a word about line regulators. Line regulators are a critical part of any 2-pound system. A line regulator will reduce the 2-pound pressure inside of a piping system down to 11 inches water column in the case of a propane installation. 11 inches water column is roughly about a half a pound. That 11 inches water column will supply those propane appliances with what their required inlet pressure is. Now, certain adjustments may need to be done to fine-tune the system, but the bottom line is anytime a 2-pound system is sold or installed, it is essential that a line regulator be installed with that system. And again, that line regulator will go before the inlet to a manifold that feeds multiple propane appliances, or it will go at the inlet to each appliance. In other words, you could have a line regulator at each appliance. And sometimes some people would argue that that creates a much more balanced and efficient system. It's also important to note that when a Maxitrol line regulator is used, that the vent limiter that's installed in the bonnet, the upper portion of that regulator, that brass vent limiter must point vertically. There's a ball bearing inside that vent limiter. It works as a safety mechanism. If for some reason the diaphragm or for whatever reason that line regulator failed, that vent limiter will prohibit the release of product into the inside of that building. Conversely, if that regulator is installed on its side or upside down or in a more of a horizontal position where the vent limiter is pointing horizontally, it will inhibit the ability for the diaphragm inside the regulator, inside the line regulator that is, to move freely and properly supply the appliances with propane vapor. Also note that Maxitrol line regulators are stamped with the fuel that they're designed for, NAT for natural gas and LP for propane. There are two basic scenarios in which a line regulator can be used in a 2-pound system. Remember that a line regulator must be installed in any 2-pound system prior to the inlet of the appliances. It'll take the 2 pounds and regulate it down to 11 inches water column. In this instance, a line regulator can be installed at the inlet to a manifold. And then, of course, the manifold will distribute low pressure down to each appliance. In this particular application, this is generally done when the appliances are close together, are in close proximity to the manifold. Remember, any line that's sized on the downstream side of that manifold is required to be sized for 11 inches water column. So therefore, those appliances in this application should be relatively close to the manifold. In this illustration, we have a first stage regulator and a 2 PSI second stage regulator, similar to the prior slide. However, in this case, we have a line regulator at each appliance instead of at a single manifold. This allows you some more options. It allows you to balance the system out a little bit better. It allows for added appliances down the road if need be, and it actually will allow for a smaller piping system inside the building. Whether you do a line regulator at the inlet to a manifold or you do a line regulator at each appliance really is up to what the requirements of the installation are. Neither one is necessarily wrong. On page 20 of the Rego L545 blue LP gas serviceman's manual, piping illustrations and exercises are available to get comfortable with sizing a 2-pound system. In this illustration on page 20 of the L545, again, we're sizing a 2-stage 2-pound system. The first step is to determine the distance between the first stage regulator and the inlet to the second stage 2 PSI. In this case, we have 26 feet. We're going to go to the following chart, which is on table 1 of which is page 21 of the L545 to size that line. So on page 21, you'll see table 1, which is the first stage piping chart if you're using copper tubing or black iron pipe. And if you remember the first image or the image on the previous page, the first stage piping was 26 feet long. So we have to determine 26 feet of piping, what size we need to carry 338,000 BTUs. So if you're looking at a piping chart, you always want to go to the next column up. You never want to go down. So if the distance between the tank and the second stage regulator is 26 feet, we're going to use the 30-foot column because 30 is larger than 26. And all of those numbers in the grid that you see are based on thousands of BTUs. So if we need 338,000 BTUs, we need to supply that many BTUs at 26 feet. We're going to go to the 30-foot column and we're going to scroll down until we see a number that is larger than 338. So again, if those numbers are in thousands of BTUs, you're at the 30-foot column, you go down to 1/2-inch copper tubing, and you'll see that tubing at 10 PSI has a BTU capacity of 584,000 BTUs, which certainly is higher than what our needs are for this installation. So that's the first step. Now we have the first stage piping sized. We're using the 30-foot column because we have a 26-foot run. We want to make sure we have at least 338,000 BTUs capacity. In this case, half-inch copper tubing is going to get us 584,000 BTUs. We just sized our first stage piping with copper. What if we want to use poly pipe? Well, on page 22 of the L545, we're going to look at table 2. And again, we're going to use that 30-foot column because it's the next column up higher than our overall length of 26 feet of first stage piping. So we're going to use poly pipe. We're going to use the 30-foot column. And again, the goal is to make sure we can supply at least 338,000 BTUs. So again, in this chart, you'll see that those numbers represent thousands of BTUs. So if I'm looking at the 30-foot column, the very first size poly pipe, which is half-inch CTS, will supply us with 762,000 BTUs. That's certainly more than what our overall demand of 338 is. So we've just sized our first stage piping using either copper tubing or poly pipe. The next step is to size the 2-pound segment of piping. That goes between the outlet of the 2-pound second stage regulator and the inlet to the line regulator. We just sized our first stage side of this installation using both copper tubing and poly pipe. Well, to size the 2-pound section or segment of piping, it's not much different. We're going to turn to page 24 because we're going to first size the 2-pound segment of piping in corrugated stainless steel tubing. So we're going to turn to page 24, we're going to look at table 4, and we're going to remember that that 2-pound segment of piping was 19 feet long. Going to the next column up, in this case, which would be the 25-foot column, we're going to scroll down and we're going to look at the second number that pops up, which is 347,000 BTUs. That represents the value, or I should say the BTU capacity, of 3/8 CSST with an EHD designation of 15 that will supply, again, 347,000 BTUs. That's the number, that's the smallest CSST at 2 PSI that we could use for this installation. A quick note about EHD. EHD means equivalent hydraulic diameter, and you'll notice there are different numbers representing different EHDs. Essentially, the higher the number, the higher the flow, or the higher the amount of BTUs that select CSST will flow. Always refer to the specific brand of CSST you're using or you're helping to size when using a CSST pipe sizing chart. If the preference is to use copper tubing or iron pipe on the 2-pound section of piping, we're going to turn to page 26 in the L545 and we're going to look at table 6. In this case, we're going to use the 20-foot column. Remember, we had a 19-foot section of 2-pound piping that was required for this installation. So we're going to always go to the next size up. In this case, on table 6, it's the 20-foot column. We're going to look at, again, our total BTU of 338,000 BTUs. That's our requirement. So if we look down that 20-foot column, the first number higher than 338,000 BTUs is 585,000 BTUs, which represents what half-inch copper tubing is capable of at 20 feet at 2 pounds pressure. Now that we've sized the first stage line and the 2-pound line, it's time to size the low pressure side. In this case, we have a 2-stage system, as you can tell by the illustration, and the line regulator is at the inlet to the manifold. So essentially what we need to do now is size the low pressure laterals on the outlet side of the manifold. So now we're going to use table 5 on page 25. which is the low pressure 11-inch water column table for CSST. So now we turn to page 25, which will help us to size the low pressure CSST in this case downstream of the manifold. The first run we have is 25 feet to a 65,000 BTU stove. It tells us we need half-inch CSST. The second run we have is 30 feet to a 200,000 BTU furnace. It tells us we need 1-inch CSST. The third run we have is 38,000 BTUs. It's a 21-foot run, and we're going to, in that case, use the 25-foot column on page 25 because there is no 21-foot column. So we're going to use the 25-foot column. It's going to tell us that we need 3/8 CSST, but again, remember, by looking at the column, it tells us only the 15 EHD will work. The last measurement we have, the last lateral, is from A to E, which is a 40-foot run, 35,000 BTU dryer, and if we look at the chart on page 25, it tells us we need to use half-inch CSST. If copper tubing or black iron pipe are chosen instead of CSST, please refer to page 23, and there you can size that low pressure downstream piping on table 3. So what's the difference between Rego 2-pound regulators and the competition? This image shows a Rego 2-pound second stage regulator on the right, and also 2 other regulators to the left of it. The one on the far left with a white cap is a Fisher 2-pound regulator. The one in the middle is also a Fisher regulator, but it's a Fisher 11-inch water column second stage regulator. The reason I think this is so important is because if you look at these regulators, it's all about communication. You want a technician to know what the system has, how the system was designed, whether it's a regular low pressure system, 11-inch water column, or if it's a 2-pound system. If you look at the 2 Fisher regulators to the left, visually they're identical. The only differences are the caps on the bonnet, one being white for a 2-pound regulator, one being black for an 11-inch water column regulator. Those caps fall off, they get lost, they can get mixed up. The point is, in addition to the long list of other advantages that Rego regulators have over the competition, identification and allowing your personnel, your staff, your technicians to be able to identify what type of a system it is by simply looking at the regulator from a distance will help to make sure that all work done on that system is done correctly and done safely. Rego offers 2 types of 2-pound second stage regulators. The LV4403Y series is capable of up to 1 million BTUs, and the LV5503Y series has a capability of up to 2.2 million BTUs. Now again, these are second stage regulators, so a traditional 10 PSI first stage regulator is needed at the container. These would go next in line, would receive 10-pound inlet, and then of course before any appliances are connected to the system, a line regulator would go in place after a 2-pound second stage regulator. 2-stage systems are also done with moderate to long runs from the container to the building. 2-pound integral twin stage regulators come in 2 different sizes from Rego. The LV404Y39, which is the smaller compact 2-pound twin stage, has a 650,000 BTU capacity, while the LV404Y9 series has an 800,000 BTU capacity. Remember that twin stage regulators are generally installed in installations where the container is closer to the building in shorter runs. And these integral twin stage 2-pound regulators share the same color as the 2-pound second stage regulators. A reminder that when Maxitrol line regulators are installed, the vent limiter, which is required if the line regulator is inside the building, has to point vertically. And in this illustration, you'll see that ball bearing I referred to earlier in the presentation, which under normal operating mode is in the lowered position. If it, for some reason, is raised, if that ball bearing raises to the top of the vent limiter, it will seal off any product that's being lost or could potentially be lost into the building. So it's very important that those vent limiters are pointed vertically. Also, they must be installed directly into the bonnet. They cannot be piped away. It's important to note that if a 2-pound system is installed for an outdoor application, maybe a pool heater or a generator, an outdoor kitchen, if the line regulator is installed, or when the line regulator is installed outdoors, the vent limiter should be replaced with a Maxitrol vent protector. It's a blue plastic, almost umbrella-like protector that screws into the bonnet of the line regulator. And all that basically does is it keeps the snow, the ice, and whatever other debris that's in the environment out of the regulator. For more information on Maxitrol 2-pound and even 5-pound systems, refer to the Maxitrol propane line pressure regulator guidebook. It's very similar to the Rego L545, but this is simply geared towards the Maxitrol line regulator. The Maxitrol book will show a lot of important information, including the design of a regulator, how it's built, how the regulator will operate, including the flow direction. More 2-pound line regulator information is also included in the book. Applications, system design, and also some of the options that are available. There's also a lot of detailed information on 5-pound OPD style regulators from Maxitrol. Some other options shown in the Maxitrol book are the different sizes of line regulators that Maxitrol offers, and also something they call in-blue technology, which is basically an optional coating that can be put on the outside of a line regulator in more harsh or adverse conditions. More specific information on how a vent limiter actually works. Also included are full specs on all of the line regulators that Maxitrol makes. Maxitrol also includes multiple pages of frequently or commonly asked questions, which many people always find helpful. I mentioned earlier how important it is to communicate with other technicians. It's important to communicate from the standpoint of informing them that what they're dealing with at this particular location is a 2-pound system. The vast majority of propane installations are based on low pressure 11-inch water column delivery pressures. When a 2-pound system is done, it's often viewed as a somewhat unique installation. So to label piping with propane gas 2 PSI stickers, to install 2-pound regulators that are clearly color coded for 2-pound systems, all can be very important when we're talking about communicating with multiple personnel that may be responding to a service call or performing some sort of an installation at a later date at a particular installation. We've put together some BTU comparisons between what a piping system would deliver supplied with 11 inches water column and what that same piping system would deliver supplied with 2 pounds. 40 feet of 3/8 copper tubing at 11 inches water column will supply 21,000 BTUs, while that same piping system at 2 PSI will supply 195,000 BTUs. 70 feet of 1/2 inch copper tubing at 11 inches water column will supply 32,000 BTUs. A 2-pound conversion will put that same piping system at 297,000 BTUs. 80 feet of 19 EHD 1/2 inch CSST will supply 52,000 BTUs at 11 inches water column. With a simple 2-pound conversion, we are now capable of supplying 393,000 BTUs with that. And lastly, 100 feet of 3/4 inch black iron pipe at 11 inches water column will deliver 175,000 BTUs, while a 2-pound conversion of that pipe will put it at 1.61 million BTUs. So if you look at all of these comparisons, increasing the delivery pressure from 11 inches water column to 2 PSI will increase the BTU capacity by approximately 9 times. To finish up this 2 PSI presentation, we've added some Q&A. First question, what is the highest pressure allowed to be run inside a residence? The answer is 5 PSI. True or false? Vent limiters should be used outdoors. The answer is false. Vent protectors should be used outdoors. Vent limiters should be used indoors. Question 3. Are special or unique first-stage regulators used in two-stage 2 PSI systems? The answer is no. A traditional first-stage regulator can be used. Question 4. True or false? 2 PSI systems increase the capacity of piping systems approximately 9 times. The answer is true. And the last question, can Maxitrol line regulators be installed on their side? The answer is no. The vent limiters must be pointed vertically. Please make a note that there are great resources available for more information on 2-pound systems. The first one is regoproducts.com, and the second one is maxitrol.com. I'd like to thank everyone for watching this presentation on 2 PSI propane systems. Hopefully this has answered some of your questions. Thanks very much. Take care.